Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please be sure to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And yeah, if you haven't noticed, it has been a while since I have been on this channel. September has been crazy busy for me. I just did not have time to make a video. It was one thing after another every week, every day of the week. I've been all over the place, but nevertheless, I am glad to be back and hopefully be back a little more consistently, especially for the month of October, as October is always an exciting time with my favorite holiday of the year coming around, which is Halloween. I love everything to do with Halloween. If you've seen my channel in the past, you know that I usually try to do some sort of Halloween-themed video during this month. And that is going to be a goal once again of this year. I do have something I think pretty fun planned for Halloween, so be staying tuned for that. But outside of that, I will still be having some regular reviews coming. And what better way to come back from a month-long or so break, maybe even ever so slightly longer, than talking about one of my favorite bands of all time who came back this year. Let's talk about Red's newest album, Rated R. So, back in 2020, when this channel was first getting started, you may remember if you've been around that long that I reviewed Red's album Declaration, which was definitely an album that kept me sane in 2020, a year that was pretty hard for everyone for some pretty obvious reasons. But I really loved that album, and I thought it was just a really cool evolution of Red. It retained a lot of the elements that we have known them for, but with a much more intense coat of paint, and I still think they managed to take a lot of good risks on the album. I rated it as my favorite album of 2020, and I would still hold to that. I do think it is a very strong Red album. It might be one of my top 3 of theirs. It's hard to say. I would really need to think about it because Red has such a great discography overall. So, of course, my expectations with Rated R coming out this year were pretty high, coming off of an album that I thought was just really great from front to back with not many flaws within it. And I was pretty intrigued by the concept, as it seems like Red was going to be doing something with this album that they hadn't really done with their others. It seems like with this one, especially in interviews and whatnot, Michael Barnes and the rest of the band, the Armstrong brothers as well, were talking about how they were going to be talking about more real-world politics and making the album more political and talking about issues that were happening around them, such as with social media, with the divides between different political parties and things like that. I thought it was going to be interesting to see them lean into some more external stuff for this album, something that they hadn't really done ever since, I would say, Release the Panic was the last album they did that on to any type of extent. And I will admit that Release the Panic is one of my least favorite Red albums. In fact, I would say that it is their weakest in my mind. So I was a little hesitant on that regard because I do prefer when Red does stuff that is more inward and introspective. I will say that the lead single left me pretty intrigued, Surrogates. Now, this track saw Red cutting a bit more loose, and it was very much so in the vein of a more upbeat song that they might have done on Release the Panic, or even Gone in some ways, except with a bit of a more intense sheet of paint. It definitely had some Korn vibes in it, in my opinion, some much more harder guitar work, and Michael's screams very much evoked Jonathan Davis of Korn, in my opinion. And this song definitely did fall in line with what they were saying about Rated R. It talked about social media and how there are so many people out there who hide behind the disguise of social media to bring about any type of hate that they want. I was left pretty excited by this track, but admittedly when Cold World came out, I did not listen to the other single that came out before this, Minus It All, but I did listen to Cold World, and this one didn't impress me quite as much. It was once again external, focusing on how dark of a world we live in, but I did find it to be a bit basic and a bit uninteresting. I didn't hate it necessarily. The chorus was catchy, but it didn't really catch my attention, and it left me feeling like I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of this album. So, what did we get overall out of Rated R? Well, let's talk about it. Now, I will come right out of the gate and say that I do think this is a good Red album, but you're going to find that as I continue to talk about this album, I don't think it is a great Red album or even an excellent one. And it certainly doesn't live up to the pedigree of what Declaration had established previously. Now, whereas Declaration was definitely on the more intense end of the Red spectrum. In fact, I would say it's probably Red's most intense album, besides maybe of Beauty and Rage, but even then I could say that it went harder than of Beauty and Rage in some aspects. Whereas this album is much more in the vein of sort of what I had predicted, Release a Panic, and even elements of Gone. Red brings back electronics on this album in a much more prominent way than what I was expecting. Surrogates is still a great lead single, and it is a very fun way to begin the album. It definitely kicks things off with a huge burst of energy and is one that I can easily headbang along to. Minus It All is also a pretty intriguing song, although I do feel this one is a little bit bare bones in its lyrical structure especially, which is something I'll get into later as a general critique of the album. But I do think this is a pretty cool song for Red, and I really especially like in the chorus how Michael sings out this very dissonant harmony when he sings out Survive. It creates a sort of unsettling but determined feel that really helps give with the song's theme of rising above very dark times and meeting the challenges of whatever hardships you are facing. It is a bit of a theme that we've heard from Red before, but I do think it works in context of the song. I will also say that Cold World, even though I do still view this song as a bit cliched, I do think this song has grown on me a bit. And in fact, it might end up being one of my favorites on the album at this point. Whereas Surrogates, I actually like a little less than Cold World, even though I do still think Surrogates is a fun song. Cold World has grown on me, and I think it's because this one specifically does a good job with building its atmosphere, and its chorus is definitely one of the catchiest on the album. I do think that Michael Barnes vocally is also very sincere on this song, and you really do feel his passion in talking about the subject matter on this song, even though I do wish that the song had gone a little more in depth. It's not as introspective as I think a song like this should be. Tell Me How to Say Goodbye might be the most poppy Red has gone in quite some time, with the exception of On Gone. And I will admit that I think this song works better as a very pop-centric cut than some of the more poppy elements that songs on Gone had, like that Sia cover that they did, Unstoppable, that I just really didn't care for. While I might prefer a more poppy song on Gone like the title track, I do think this one is a nice sort of follow-up to what Gone was going for on some of those songs that were meant to be more accessible and Red trying to dip their toes into the pop waters. The song is very catchy, and I think the subject matter is pretty relatable and fun about trying to say goodbye to a relationship that is essentially dead in the water, one that shouldn't really be going on anymore. I think the song works in that regard, and it is a pretty fun track to listen to. I really like how different Michael's vocals sound on the song, and the female backing vocals is a nice touch. Still Bleeding is a really cool track, and it brings back something that I've really been missing from Red ever since I heard What You Keep Alive and The Darkest Part, the horror vibes that they can bring on their songs. This one has that, and maybe in the biggest abundance I've seen since What You Keep Alive. This one feels perfect for a Halloween party with the sort of eerie organ-like sounds playing in the background, and the way the strings create this feeling that you're in a sort of haunted house, and it's a really cool soundscape that they create here. I really enjoyed this one for that reason, and Michael's vocals even sound pretty unsettling in parts here. I also really think this song does a good job of building up to its sort of breakdown that it has. This is definitely one of the more intense moments on the album, and I think the payoff is very much so earned. This track is a lot of fun, and it shows Red doing something pretty cool on it. I really like how they really dedicate full on to the vibe they're going for in this song and creating a horror atmosphere that's just undeniably and irresistibly fun. This is definitely another huge highlight for me. And man, the closing track, Emergency, was such a pleasant surprise. We haven't really seen Red delve into their faith-based lyrics in quite some time. I would say the last time we really saw that was on Gone to some extent, but even there it was pretty subtle. This is one of the more explicitly spiritual songs we've seen from Red in a while, where Michael is specifically crying out to God, and it definitely brings out a wave of nostalgia in my opinion. It definitely evokes the End of Silence and Innocence and Instinct era more than many songs that I've heard from Red in a while. And I'll admit that might be part of the reason why I love this song so much. I do think this is just a good song in its own right. I think it's a nice update of those two songs. And I always like seeing Michael talk about his faith. He does it in a way that is so genuine and personal and doesn't feel like he's just preaching to a choir or being just so over the top with it like some other radio Christian rock bands can do. He does it so well. And the backing guitar work by the Armstrongs is great on the song. It also just has such a sense of urgency in it, which is perfect for the song's title, Emergency. And I just think the song overall has a really good arc, and I think it's a strong way to end the album by the band finally sort of looking internally after the whole rest of the album has been more externally focused and talking about the world. Now they're finally realizing, oh, I need to look inward to my faith for reconciliation with all these dark things that are going on in the world. It's actually a fairly clever arc. Although, once again, I do wish that maybe they had delved into it a little more personally than they had throughout the album. And that sort of leads into my first sort of critique for this album. For as much as I do like a lot of the stuff that's going on this album, and I like that Red is trying to embrace some more electronic aspects and even some more poppy aspects, and is trying some new things like creating a horror vibe, and a much more just radio-friendly pop vibe on a song like Tell Me How to Say Goodbye, I do still think that this album isn't as fleshed out as it could be. I think that's the biggest problem of this one. That was even a problem of Declaration to an extent, but I mean, Declaration still had songs like The Evening Hate and From the Ashes that really expanded what they were going for and went above and beyond at the 5-minute mark and actually exploring what they were doing. On this album, I feel like we just don't spend enough time getting into the world that this album was trying to create, and it's so much so that it doesn't really feel established. It definitely doesn't feel like we're entering a sort of landscape like Red was able to create on albums like Innocence and Instinct or of Beauty and Rage. That feels somewhat lacking here, which is a bit disappointing to me. There are also just some songs on here where they just don't really stick out to me that much, I'm gonna have to admit. For an example, The Suffering, this song just sort of feels like a B-side to Declaration in my opinion. It is not nearly as interesting as the more intense cuts from Declaration, and it sort of feels out of place on this album, which is trying to be a bit more accessible in my opinion. It just feels sort of forgettable, and even the breakdown in the song feels sort of rote and cliched. I also think that the back-to-back songs of Our Time Will Come and Last Forever are just not doing much for me. These both definitely feel like cuts that could fit right on Release Panic, and that they're talking about pretty cliched subject matter. Our Time Will Come is about exactly what you would think it would be, that our time will come when we will leave this world, and that we should be leaving a good impact on it while we're here. And Last Forever is sort of going down a similar path, but it's just not interesting in either track, in my opinion. The second half of this album is definitely a more mediocre outing than the first half, where I generally like most of the songs on there. But there is a song on the first half that I have to talk about as well, and that is Your Devil is a Ghost. This one feels like a song that Breaking Benjamin would write, especially late career Breaking Benjamin, because it has all these buzzwords in it that I've heard Red use before, and they sort of group them all together, and it creates a song that I feel is somewhat meaningless. I get what it's going for, but it just sort of feels like a song where all these words are put together to sound cool, like Your Devil is a Ghost. Yeah, that's a sort of cool sounding song title, but they don't really explore much of what it means. Something else I mentioned was that I wish that the album had delved and explored more into its topics. I think songs like Cold World and Still Bleeding, even a song that I do like, would benefit from being even longer. Emergency as well would be a great one to be longer. They could have really expanded these songs, and I think really helped with making their atmosphere even more interesting. As they are, the songs feel just like there's a little something missing. This is especially true for Cold World, in my opinion, which is a song that I did say I liked, and might even be a sort of underrated favorite of mine, but the song could have been so much more, in my opinion. As it is here, it is a good song, but it's not one that's reaching the mark of greatness. And I think that is sort of the case for this album as a whole. It is a good album, it is a good Red album, but it is not reaching the marks of what they are most capable of, in my opinion. It's definitely not having the heights of Declaration, and it doesn't have the really powerful journeys that they've had on previous albums like Innocence and Instinct, or Until We Have Faces, or Of Beauty and Rage. It more feels like Release a Panic, if I'm being honest. That's the album I'm gonna most easily compare it to. It's an album that has a good, solid collection of songs, but it doesn't feel like the songs leave much impact outside of a couple select few. I do think tracks like Emergency and Still Bleeding could be among Red's best for me in the future, but as a whole, this just isn't one of my favorite Red albums. I would say it's one of their weakest, but even when Reds at their weakest, that still makes for a good album, and so for that reason, I'm going to give this one a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars, although I do wish I liked it a little bit more. So yeah, that's my review of Rated R by Red. What were your thoughts on this album? I've seen some very conflicting thoughts on this one. Some people seem to be even more negative on it than me, but some people seem to feel pretty positive about it. So let me know your thoughts on Rated R in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave this video a like, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.